I've been using the iPhone 13 and 13 mini for about a day now, and I think there are like 8 important changes and features that you should know about. So this video is going to be about that and my experience with them. So this first one is the iPhone 13, and this is actually in the pink color, but I think calling this pink is a stretch. It's definitely a very subtle pink. It looks more off-white in most lighting environments, but if the light hits it just right, it definitely does have a subtle pink hue, which I like. Other than that, from first glance, I think most people would say this looks pretty similar to the iPhone 12, but there are a few differences. Number one, the first change that you should know about is the display. The notch is now 20% smaller, but I've noticed something with it that I haven't seen anyone else mention, and it's the fact that it's a little bit longer. So actually now when you're watching 18:9 content, the notch cuts into the content a little bit. It's nothing major, but you can't really unsee it once you've seen it. The notch being smaller didn't actually lead to any improvements except for the fact that it looks a little smaller when you're looking at the display. So maybe the display is a little bit more immersive. But it feels like they could have added extra information to the top, like a battery life indicator, and they didn't. So this change does not feel like a significant change to me if you're like an iPhone 12 user. The more significant change is the brightness. So this display is now brighter, which means indoors it's much nicer to look at, like it looks brighter, but it really matters outdoors. Outdoor visibility is significantly improved with this phone. I definitely notice a difference, like I'm able to actually see my display when I'm outside. And other than that, it's a pretty standard Apple display. So it has great contrast, great colors, great sharpness, but it doesn't have high refresh rate. Apple saved that for the Pro and Pro Max, and I feel like a lot of Android phones in this price bracket do have high refresh rate, so I definitely think people are going to be bummed not to see it here, and I'm definitely going to test it on the Pro and Pro Max. If you want to see my full video on that, you should definitely get subscribed. Change number 2 is build differences. So the button placement on this phone is actually a little different than last year. The mute lock switch is actually a little lower down on the phone, and so is the power button, so it makes one-hand use a little bit easier. And the camera on the back is now in a diagonal arrangement instead of the vertical one from last year, which will help with some stabilization, and more on the camera soon. Another change that this phone has this year is the processor. So it now has an A15 Bionic versus the A14 from last year, and that actually leads to 2 really important things. First thing is performance improvements. The A14 was already really fast. This just improves upon that. It also adds more shelf life to this phone to have a fast processor like that may last for years to come. And it also really improves battery life. So this phone, Apple's reporting, is gonna get an extra hour and a half of battery life. And this one day of testing obviously isn't conclusive enough yet. I'll cover it in the full review, but it seems really solid. I definitely am able to make it through a pretty moderate to heavy day with this phone without having to charge it until bedtime. And those changes are all nice, and they definitely make this phone a better value prop than the iPhone 12 was last year, but the bigger changes are with the camera. So let's talk about camera tech, and if the changes that they made, 3 fundamental ones, actually make a difference in practice. And in order to do that, we gotta unbox the iPhone 13 mini and talk about both of them at the same time. So Apple has a feature called portrait mode, which basically allows you to take a photo of a subject and then have the background artificially blurred. A lot of people like the look of this because it looks like a professional camera that has good depth of field. So Apple's been doing this for many years, and as the years have gone on, they've gotten a little bit better edge detection and realism, and it's getting to a point now where it's pretty good. So they have moved the feature over to video, which we've seen in the past, like Samsung did this earlier in the year, and they really struggled with it because it's very hard to do edge detection when there are let's say 30 frames a second. It's hard to make that look natural. You really need a actual setup for that to really look good. The background here is naturally blurred behind me because that's what the sensor is doing. It's not because I'm adding it in post, whereas these phones add it in post using artificial intelligence. They're not pulling off any miracles here. Depending on the subject, you could definitely see that it's a software edit blur and not the camera having incredible bokeh or a large sensor. But this phone then has another feature up its sleeve, which is the more impressive one that is actually looking pretty decent so far, and that's rack focus. So rack focus is a pretty popular thing in Hollywood and the film industry, where you'll have a subject in focus and then the focus will smoothly transition to another subject. Kind of looks cool, it looks cinematic, and it's very hard to achieve on a smartphone because the focus is very jumpy and you also often need manual control. What Apple is doing to bring this feature to the iPhone is to give you the ability to edit this in post. So in the Photos app, you can actually change in post which area was focused on, and then it will actually smoothly transition between those 2 areas. And I tested one example on the first day that I got this phone, and it was pretty good. It's not amazing. The examples that Apple showed were not too impressive to me, but I think if you do it right and you give it a couple tries, you can definitely get some interesting results. And I'll definitely further test that in the camera comparison because I do have high hopes that it could be an interesting novel feature. Similarly, color profiles is an option that they add. So when you open up the camera app for the first time, it will allow you to pick between different profiles like standard, cool tone, and basically this just lets you personalize a little bit what you want your image to look like. Because I know a lot of people often say that iPhone images are flatter in comparison to like the Pixel or Samsung. So if you feel that way, you can move to the vibrant option and kind of get that. Of course, you can edit your photos in post, but it is nice just to have it out of camera and have the same effect applied to every photo you take. But by far the biggest camera enhancement and the one that I'm most excited for is the hardware-based one, and it's the new ultra-wide sensor. And this sensor allows for 47% more light in comparison to the iPhone 12, which means that lower light photos are going to be better, there's going to be less noise, more sharpness, and it takes in more detail from the scene. So I'm definitely going to keep testing that, but the initial photos I took from it, I was pretty impressed by. The story with both of these phones feels like a story of an iterative update, right? Like slightly better battery life, build improvements, better camera. It doesn't feel like anything is like groundbreaking, but I don't think it necessarily has to be for the positioning of these in the market. These are supposed to just be like the de facto go-to iPhone, and I think the iPhone 13 is a really good value prop. The 13 mini is a bit of a different story, and it's an interesting story because last year with the 12 mini, Apple launched that phone and it didn't sell well. They actually halted production on 2 million units, and I just made a full video covering the story of the 12 mini, so if you want to hear more about how the mini did, you can click right here. But I think battery life improvements may change the narrative, so I'm definitely going to be putting it through its paces for the full review. I hope you found this informative and helpful, maybe even entertaining. If you did, thank you so much for watching and getting to this point, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.